Hi, everyone. It's Joe Veneri, the host of Fit Insider, the show where I talk with the entrepreneurs, executives, and investors who are redefining the business of fitness and wellness. This week, we're excited to bring you another edition of Startup Spotlight, a recurring series where we speak with early-stage founders working on fitness and wellness startups. We usually focus on established companies, operators, and investors, and we'll continue to bring you those conversations most weeks. But from time to time, we're highlighting companies at the beginning of their journey. Today, I'm joined by Zaw Thet, CEO of Exer. Exer uses AI and computer vision to power its motion coaching platform. In this episode, we talk about Exer Studio, the company's Mac app that creates a leaderboard and captures workout stats for any virtual workout without additional hardware. A partnership with Zoom that lets trainers easily layer Exer on top of their classes, and the company's B2B2C model aimed at helping trainers better engage with their clients in a remote training environment. Let's get into it. Zaw, welcome to Fit Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Excited to learn more about Exer. And I think to kick things off, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing this for about 20 years. Actually, I came out to Stanford in the middle of the first dot-com boom back in 98, which I know is going to make me sound old, maybe to some of your listeners. And got so excited that I dropped out of school and started my first company in 99 at the age of 19. So I've been basically doing this ever since, starting companies, investing in companies. Had actually started a venture fund back in 2012, now on its third fund. And as part of that was researching basically the connected fitness space. And that's what led us after, a bunch of diligence and work, which we'll talk about, to start Exer. And, went back to the light. From the dark side.
Yeah. So what were some of the insights that you saw? I mean, diving in specifically, tell us a little bit about the product. What were the insights you saw as you were working on this space and obviously in the fitness area that led you to this particular idea, and maybe how far along you are at this point?
Yeah. So we actually started way back in 2018. So the beginning of 2018, I had actually gotten a Peloton for my wife for Christmas a month before. And getting on the Peloton and actually, feeling like I was in a studio, but not having to go to a studio or deal with scheduling and conflicts, and with two young kids at the time, it really made me think that there's something here. There's something in this space. And so I went out to basically go look for what was going to be the next Peloton. And so I looked at all the different hardware devices. I looked at all the different app companies. We did thousands of consumer surveys. And originally I was just looking to invest. And so the two things that really stood out to me coming back in the consumer surveys were, one, the number one thing people would say is, I don't know if I'm doing it right. Meaning, if they're working out at home by themselves, at a gym by themselves, pre-pandemic, they just had no idea if they were actually doing it correctly. And so that was feeling, the confidence level was just down. So that was one. And then two is they were looking for it to be more interactive, both to make it more fun for them, to make it more competitive, to hold themselves more accountable. And so, looking at the apps at the time, obviously there's, a lot of time has passed. A lot of them just felt like, they were content, they were media companies, and they were doing great, right? Absolutely great. But it really depended on how many Instagram followers you had, or, sort of what your YouTube following was. And there wasn't really a lot of technology that I felt was in there. And so that was the original thesis for Exer, which was, can we use AI on the edge? Can we use computer vision to actually augment that at-home or by-yourself workout experience? And that's how we got started.
And so what does that maybe customer journey look like today? If I want to use Exer, if I'm whether using it for my workouts, I know recently you announced a collaboration on top of Zoom. So what does that experience look like, and maybe how are you reaching customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just talk about Exer Studio, which is what you just referenced, which was we announced as part of a big Zoom partnership, but also works with any other virtual streaming platform. So the way our technology works is basically two things. One is we do something called pose estimation on the edge. And so what that means is that off of any 2D camera, we're seeing 20 plus body points in real time. No depth sensor required. It works on a phone. It works on a laptop. It works on a tablet. So we're sort of the no hardware company, right? We're the people that's like, I'm sitting here in my office with the Peloton and mirror and a bunch of other stuff in here. And I love those devices, but a lot of people can't afford them, or they just don't want them in their homes, or they don't have accessibility for them. So we're the company that's basically going after this space with no hardware, meaning the hardware you already have at home. So the first part of what we do is we basically see the human body in real time, and do that across any edge device. The second piece of what we do is then actually we have a whole platform that sits underneath it that allows us to understand what the body is actually doing. So it's one thing for me to be able to see the right elbow, the left elbow, and I'm just waving it around in circles. It's another thing for me to be able to see, okay, someone's doing an external shoulder rotation post-rehab and their elbow's sticking out too far from their body, and we need to bring that back in. Or someone's in the middle of doing a squat and their knees are going way too far out over their toes. And so that's what the second part of our AI platform does. What we announced last week, or a couple weeks ago now, depending on when this comes out, is a companion app for all of these live streaming classes that are happening today. As you know, better than most because of the newsletter and all the stats and the research that you guys put out, 90% of all trainers basically got furloughed, right? Gyms have had to shut back down, open back up, shut back down again. And so they're looking for this digital solution. And there was this huge push over the last couple of months to move everyone over to Zoom and other video platforms to keep that sense of community going, right? So what we did was we took the same AI technology that we've been building out for phone apps for stuff like physical therapy and other fitness apps, and we brought that over to these live virtual workouts where we were creating Peloton-style leaderboards. You can shift the mode so it looks more like an Orange Theory style zone, or an F45 style zone, like a heart rate monitor or a MyZone would show you in the gym. And we've created that interactivity and that competitiveness that comes back without any hardware required.
And so when you think about the core consumer or the end user, is it, hey, we want people to use this, obviously the technology, and implement it across whatever device, whatever training style they're using? Or are you saying, hey, let's start to target some of these companies who have built this technology or a platform, and we'll integrate it on top of that and go kind of B2B versus a B2C or a D2C route?
Yeah. So the way we think about, so our mission as a company is help millions of people move, train, and play better. But how we get there, I think, is a really interesting thing in the industry. So we have chosen not to go direct to consumer. You can, obviously, as a consumer, you can come in, you can sign up and discover basically the list of coaches and studios that are using the platform. The way that we think about this is that we're empowering coaches, we're empowering gyms and studios. So it's really more B to B to C, meaning I'm a coach, I'm on ClassPass, MindBody, whatever platform, new platforms. There's a ton of them that are obviously being developed, doing these live stream classes. I need a way to keep these classes with groups of 10, 20, 30, 40 plus people more engaged, more interactive. Just like I sign up for Zoom, a coach signs up for Exer, distributes it for free to their athletes, and then is able to use it across the spectrum. So that's primarily who we're targeting. And we also think, as we see coaches, trying to make a living, in these crazy times, giving them an edge, giving them something that's differentiated, giving them something that allows them to handle more students per class, provide more interactivity per class, will only increase the amount of revenue that they get. And that's something that we're, especially during this pandemic, are passionate about.
Sure. I think it's super interesting and really smart when you start to look at, you mentioned Pelotons and mirrors, but also a big selling point for like a tempo or a tonal is that, hey, we have this technology where you can track movements and you can really help to improve your form, be safer, and all the things that, kind of get overlooked when you just think of like maybe video on demand, like how do I put out more content and or train more people? So what type of stats, what type of analytics are the coaches getting on the back end to say, hey, this is how people are performing. This is maybe how we can help them improve. And these are the things to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I wish I had my co-founder Clint on here because he's our head coach and has been a performance coach for the last 20 years, trains pro athletes all over. So a lot of this obviously is based on his experience as well. As a coach, you have a bunch of different views. So you can look at people and see their output over time, just like you would a heart rate tracker, but obviously without having to use any hardware. You can look at a class and basically see who's having trouble maintaining form, who's actually able to hold form. So it allows you at a glance to get a glimpse of, oh, okay, I see that Zaws in the gray zone. So this is the zones view. And he's good. Like he's staying static. He's able to hold his squat. Oh, I see over here, that Clint is in this purple view and he is moving around. He's not able to maintain stability. So I'm able to quickly, give him a reminder, give him a shout out. And we've seen gyms and studios, there's a lot of these digital only ones that are popping up. We've seen them, now using two coaches, right? One coach that's actually demonstrating the movement, one coach that's looking at the Exer dashboard next to the Zoom or whatever video conference solution they're using, and using it to provide even more feedback. And I think that's a pretty interesting phenomenon that's only going to continue as the months go by.
What has it been like to this point? I know recently announced the partnership, also a fundraising announcement, but also you guys have been working on this, like you said, since 2018. So what's been happening behind the scenes? And now as you think about going to market in a much bigger way, working with the different studios, so just like, how are you thinking about getting that out there in public and then now onboarding more people?
Yeah. So as you said, we took most of 2018 to actually build the neural net that allows us to see these body points. So that was basically a year of work. That was 18, bleeding into a little bit of 19. And then in 19, we had to build the platform to actually train the AI to understand what it was seeing, right? So great, you can see, oh, I know this is the top of the head, but when the top of the head is doing a burpee, what does that actually mean? Or the whole body is doing a burpee or some other movement, a bench press, a deadlift, a kettlebell swing. So we had to took a year to basically build that out. All of that was pretty much ready at the beginning of 2020, and we were just starting to roll out a series of apps. We have one in the App Store called Perfect Plank. It's really just a proof of concept. We're not doing any marketing to it. We're not doing anything really with it, but it allows us, is where we test all the different parts of the platform. We have a physical therapy app that's being tested in clinics nationwide, which we're really excited about. That's primarily mobile and iPad. And then the pandemic hit. And, we went through this kind of existential experience of like, okay, well, we know that our technology and our company is probably more relevant now than has ever been before. And we had all of these coaches and studios come to us and saying like, hey, we took the last month and a half, got all of our customers up on Zoom and other virtual platforms, but now there's Zoom fatigue. Now we need to make it more interactive. Now we need to, be able to provide more to our athletes. And so we took the same technology that we built underneath the scenes and ported that over to the laptop and the browser to allow people to basically do it with these virtual workouts. And now we're in the process of basically rolling that out across, hundreds of coaches, actually thousands of coaches that are sitting on the wait list. It's just getting up and running. It was announced basically, at the beginning of October. And now we're at a point where, anyone can basically come on and as an athlete or a consumer, take a class, which is great.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So how did the initial vision for what you were building differ from kind of the direction it's taken now? Was it always the idea that you were going to develop this, the motion sensing and apply it to fitness professionals and brands as they were working with athletes and exercisers? Or was there kind of a different vision that now has kind of evolved given COVID?
Yeah, we'd always had the vision. And I think unlike a lot of companies that are out there in the space today, which are trying to basically disrupt the fitness industry, I think in large part to Clint's influence, coming from the fitness industry as a studio and gym owner, as a performance coach, our philosophy had always been, we don't want to replace coaches. We want to augment what they do. And so there's nothing that's ever going to replace that one-on-one human interaction ever, right? Like there's nothing better than being with a top trainer or a physical therapist or whoever it is. You're not going to replace that with AI. And so we'd always thought about this as augmenting it, building it as a two-sided platform, helping coaches on one side, helping, consumers and athletes on the other side. And so as we looked at this, I think the big difference that the pandemic has made for us is that when we were first starting out, we were primarily just mobile. We'd always had ambitions of going multi-device, right? Going mobile, tablet, laptop, eventually even getting into physical spaces where you can use this technology. One day our hope is when the gyms open back up, you'll have this seamless experience where you'll get the same feedback that you get over a Zoom class or working out by yourself as you do if you were working out in a gym using Exer. But with the pandemic, what we saw was that acceleration, obviously, towards more laptop, towards more live streaming classes, I think we would have been silly not to take advantage of that and go after that. So that's the biggest change.
I think that's an interesting piece that will be, it'll reveal itself as we get back to exercising and just being in public, but beyond exercise, but back to life as we knew it, that you want to supplement that experience. There are going to be hopefully more people who are now exercising, right? They have different choices, whether that's purely digital, whether that's connected fitness, whether that's in person. And then you have trainers now who are able to say, however I want to work with my client, I'm going to have the tools to improve this relationship, to get them the results that they need, and ultimately have diversified revenue. Have you put any thought into like what it looks like in a world where you do have that kind of optionality, the hybrid model where they're working with clients at home, they're working with clients in the physical spaces? You mentioned potentially going into the physical spaces. So maybe looking ahead, what the use case might look like.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball that would allow me to see into the future. I would put a lot more bets down on Super Bowl winners.
Sure.
But my thesis, or our thesis, is that there's obviously been this huge push towards digital. But people are, as humans, we're social animals. And so we want that connectivity with other people. But we're also living in a society that's really busy, right? Like there's work, there's school, there's kids, there's all this stuff going on. So you want optionality as well. And so I think what's going to evolve is that, hopefully when this is all over and vaccines are accessible and people are comfortable, there's still going to be this big push between both in-person and hybrid and digital. And I think, for us, we want to be able to span both of those. I think, it was interesting when we were talking to a bunch of these gyms and studios that had shut down, basically in March and April, all of them were just scrambling for a solution, trying to figure out Zoom, trying to figure out music streaming rights, like what music could they play, what music couldn't they play, how to get people online, what the right mics were, like lighting. Like it was just, like sort of basic issues that they've now finally figured out. And then in June, when we're coming back to them with like, hey, we built this really cool thing, a lot of them were like, yeah, that's great, fantastic, but I'm trying to open my gym back up now. And 2 months later, as everything spiked again, they came back and said, okay, all right, we know we're going to have to do digital for a long time, and it's always going to have to be a part of our strategy. And I think that is going to be the lasting legacy beyond obviously all the economic impact and Chapter 11s and other stuff that we're seeing in the fitness industry.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to touch on, I mean, obviously there's the technology component that goes into this. You mentioned taking a year to build it out and now kind of evolving it to different use cases. But what does it, I think a lot of times early stage companies, especially as they're getting out there with the technology, the product, it's not often discussed, like what does, in this case, the sales org look like? So how are you reaching out to trainers? Is there an opportunity to go maybe at an enterprise level with a studio brand or a gym brand? How are you thinking about getting those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we basically think about it two ways. So one is bottoms up. And so that's, basically targeting individual trainers. And some of that is paid ads. Some of that is word of mouth. Some of that is, obviously we're trying to build virality into the equation. So giving coaches incentives, to get other coaches on board. So that's kind of the bottoms up model. And then tops down, we're working with a bunch of big organizations, the URSAs of the world, the club industries of the world, other big marketplaces that already have a bunch of trainers or gyms and studios that they've onboarded as part of their organization. And so we have, just to break it down for the startup folks out there, we have basically a growth team that's focused on the bottoms up. And then we have myself and a couple others that are basically doing the tops down and the big partnership stuff. And so a lot of that will get announced over the course of the next, month or two. But that's, I think, you gotta stick a bunch of irons in the fire, figure out what works, and then we'll double down on what's working the best.
Yeah, sure. You beat me to it. I was going to ask anyone to announce, but I will kind of stay tuned as you start to roll those out. But certainly an exciting time. Kind of looking ahead a little bit, when you think about the roadmap, obviously we talked about there's no crystal ball, can't really predict how things are going to play out. But when you look at the roadmap and think about milestones that you're targeting, maybe over the next 3 to 6 months as we get into early 2021, is it about users, number of instructors, number of brands, feature launches? Like, what are some of those benchmarks you have that you're kind of looking forward to?
Yeah, another great question. So, as a startup, we subscribe to the OKR philosophy, objectives and key results. And so, we basically set our plan every quarter. I'm not sure as a startup, you can set a plan much farther than that. You have the big vision where you want to go in a couple of years, but everything changes so fast. And especially in these crazy times, like they change even faster. So the way that we think about it is we want to have, a really solid system. Obviously it's still in beta. And we're constantly getting feedback from about 200 plus coaches that are using the platform. We'd like to take that up to 1,000 or so that we have not just coaches, but coaches at a bunch of different studios and gyms, kind of enterprise partners, rolling this out with marketplace partners. So that's a big component for us on sort of where we want to go from a sales standpoint or business development standpoint. I really think business development is just a fancy word they made up to get MBAs to do sales.
Sure.
And I say that as an MBA. But that's it from a partnership standpoint and kind of where we want to go. And then I think towards the beginning of next year, sometime in Q1, we'll actually start to turn on the paid plans. It's going to be a SaaS pricing model, very typical to Zoom, sort of in that vein, as well as start to roll out some of the additional advanced features of the AI. So being able to do an AMRAP challenge, right? As many reps as possible. Coach says 30 seconds, go. People do as many squats or push-ups or whatever movement as possible, and that shows up on the leaderboard, right? It's kind of like magic. People, you don't have to know exactly how it works, but that's one component. The form feedback. So being able to deliver feedback to users and to coaches after the fact, for a coach, during a session for a user, those are all rolling out in Q1 as well. So it's going to be exciting next 3 to 6 months, and we're stoked to see where it goes.
Yeah, and with that kind of two follow-ups, maybe on different ends of the spectrum, what are the biggest challenges, right? As you think about rolling this out, obviously it's hard to predict, but in your mind, are there things that you've pointed to as like, this is going to be something that we're going to have to confront, and then we'll see where we go from there?
Yeah, like any startup, we face challenges every single day. I think there's a couple of different things. One is there was this huge lift to get people comfortable with Zoom already, right? And people are finally just getting used to that. So now we layer another technology on top of that. Even though we've tried to make it as user-friendly and as seamless as possible, it's still hard, right? Like it's another thing that you have to open up next to your live streaming platform. It's fun, and once you get into it, you stick with super high retention, but it's still another thing to add to the list. So I think that's component number one. Component number two is really, as we look at an industry that is opening up, closing down, here in Denver, as of now, the end of October, gyms are shutting back down. So you get this whiplash between like, what am I trying to focus on? Am I doing in person? Am I not doing in person? And I think that's just a constant struggle and mental drain, frankly, for a lot of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of that, I guess if we're talking about the challenges there, what does success look like? Even if you zoom way out, you've talked a little bit about the mission, getting more people exercising, increasing activity, all those things. But say everything goes according to plan, right? Ultimately, what does success look like, and how will you measure that?
Yeah, I mean, I think success for us is actually easier than a lot of companies, right? If I take a B2B company that's, I don't know, just making this up, selling accounting software, right? What does success look like? Is it it's revenue, it's EBITDA, it's going public, a lot of those things. Success for us is going to be measured in the number of people that we can help, and the number of coaches, physical therapists, gym studios that we can keep in business, while this is going on, and then provide a solution. So to me, that's the real success metric, is how many people do we actually end up helping? And if we do that from a financial standpoint, we'll be just fine. Like I'm not worried about that side of it, because we're providing value to both sides of the marketplace. But I think for all of us, the success factor here is not designated by a monetary number, but it's designated by how many people do we help.
And I like the fact that, when you talk about it, you loop in physical therapists, right? So I think a lot of times when we think about this, there's this perception that everybody, or at least the solutions right now, a lot of them are catering towards a boutique fitness instructor. And so kind of everybody's in this vein of how do I be that star instructor that has the brand and kind of the massive audience? But you also loop in the physical therapists. How are you, can you just elaborate on how you're thinking about that market as it goes beyond maybe what people think of when they hear the word fitness?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think for those of us that have been unfortunate enough to have to go through physical therapy for an injury or something else, and I've had my fair share of those, you think about the physical therapist experience as when you're in there with the physical therapist, it's fantastic. But what happens when you go home? Right? Both for you and for the physical therapist. You get a piece of paper with maybe a code on it or a couple links to videos, and it's a pretty crappy experience, right? It's not something, again, that comes back to that core question that we saw in all these surveys pre-company launch of how do I know if I'm doing it right? And I need help making myself more accountable. And so, what's being tested right now is a physical therapy app that we have, where when you go home, you're sent with this app, and it not only corrects your form at home, but also helps hold you accountable. It counts how many reps you did. So let's just say in reality, I had a slap repair on my right shoulder, tore my labrum off playing volleyball and rock climbing, probably, what is it now? Oh man, 12, 13 years ago. And when I was in there with the physical therapist, it was great. But was my adherence at home that good? Did I do everything I needed to do to get back into peak condition? No. I mean, the honest truth is I didn't. And, eventually I got back, and that was great. But, just trying to give people tools to do that, and give tools to physical therapists and to surgeons, on the orthopedic side to get their patients back into better success and better outcomes. And so that's how we think about that. That had been basically our plan for 2020 pre-pandemic, was to just really push that piece of it and layer other fitness apps on top of it. So we're still actively doing that. And we have a whole team that's dedicated to that as well. But, we saw on the live streaming side that was, something that we needed to be able to tackle, and wanted to plant our flag as being the first in that market. So that's why we've added on. Most startups, I would caution as both a founder and investor, not to do multiple things. The only reason I think we can get away with it is because it's built on the same technology, and it's just basically a different skin on top of it. And then we have two, leaders, and basically one person focusing on the physical therapy side and one person focusing on the live streaming side that head up those orgs.
Yeah, I think it's really smart, and it goes to just that, as we've been talking about this whole conversation, the broader evolution of how do we do things remotely? How do we increase access and adherence and really impact those things over time, both for the end user, but also for that person, whether it's a physical therapist or a trainer or an instructor who's just trying to figure out how to run their business and do it better. So it's certainly an exciting time, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. As we look to wrap up here, can you tell folks just where can they find you on the internet, and how to get in touch if they want to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to check out any of the live streaming, and this is especially for all the coaches or gym owners and studio owners, go to Exer Studio, EXER studio.com. That is the studio product that's for all of the live streaming. Everything else in terms of company announcements lives on exer.ai, exer.ai. And our social media handle, which we'll put in there somewhere, is Move with Exer across all the different social media platforms.
Awesome. We'll make sure folks can find you, make it easy, put it in the show notes. Zaw, thanks for joining us today, and excited to share this episode.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. For more from Fit Insider, visit insider.fit.co and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Then go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.